Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Wednesdays at 1. I'm Carol Stewart of Employment Sector Council, and I'm joined by my co-host Jessica Gowers of the Workforce Planning and Development Board. This series is supported by the City of London as part of its efforts to respond to COVID-19 by bringing us all together to learn, share, and connect.
Okay.
So we're planning lots of interesting topics and conversations for 2022. And we hope that you will continue to join us. And as always, we love to hear your ideas for future sessions. Today, we're pleased to have Geoff Hume from Pathways Employment Help Center join us. Geoff is a paralegal and an advocate, and he will be covering changes to social benefits in the wake of the pandemic and the eligibility requirements for the major provincial social benefits programs. Please use the chat to share comments and questions. And we've got Geoff's permission to share his contact information in the chat. So please do connect with him because he is a great employment sector resource. Thanks again, Geoff, for joining us, and I'll pass it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much for having me. So as Carol said, my name's Geoff. I'm a paralegal licensed by the Law Society of Ontario. And what I do at Pathways is mainly employment and disability law. So if someone is denied government benefits, I help them appeal that decision before tribunals. As a result, I have collected some information on social benefits, especially with what's going on right now. So I'm going to start sharing my screen in a second, but I did want to give you all the chance just to put a face with the name and the voice. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. Feel free to ask any questions you have in the chat. I will do my best to answer all of them. And yeah, I'm going to get started. All right, is everybody able to see the presentation?
Yes, I can see it.
All right. So we're talking about different benefits in employment law that has changed since the pandemic started. So we're going to be going over that. I didn't touch as much on existing benefits that were around before COVID, in the interest of time. But if you have any questions about social benefits in general, I invite you to send me an email. I will respond to every email as quickly as I'm able to and try and answer any questions that you may have. So I'm going to start off today by talking about employers' duty of care, because this is something that we need to understand how employment law has changed. Since employment law first started, employers in Canada have always had the obligation to take every reasonable precaution to protect workers and customers' health and safety. So this includes protecting them from exposure to infectious diseases at work. Employers are obligated under law to take reasonable precautions, and as with anything in law, we get hung up on the definitions of words quite a bit. Reasonable is really the key word in there, and will look different to different companies. So what's reasonable to a mom and pop type store is going to look very different from what's reasonable for Amazon or Walmart, because with more resources comes more ability to respond to things. Now, a couple of things that are the same, no matter how large or small your business is that as an employer, employers need to create and enforce health and safety policies and procedures. When the pandemic first hit, way back a couple of years ago now, there was a scramble from workplaces to come up with safety policies and procedures. The government has seen what has worked, what hasn't worked, and has made suggestions for what employers should put in those. And now that we're almost 2 years into this, we're starting to see a lot more consistency, at least within similar sized organizations. The other obligation that every employer, regardless of size, has is they need to train staff on potential hazards and how to recognize them. And they need to write and implement policies and use of personal protective equipment to safeguard against those. So that can be anything from safety goggles to steel-toed boots to masks or face shields. So how do we know if a workplace policy is reasonable? Well, the ultimate answer to that is the courts will decide, but a couple of things that the courts look at when deciding the reasonable person test is, if a reasonable person or an average person knows or ought to know that a hazard exists, they have an obligation to act on it. So every reasonable person in Canada right now is well aware of the hazards posed by the pandemic, and therefore every workplace in Ontario, in Canada, has an obligation to act on that to put policies in place. Reasonable precautions viewed by the courts are ones that reduce the risk to the greatest degree possible without causing financial hardship. So they don't expect businesses to go bankrupt to be able to enforce policies. However, they do need to take steps. So requiring masks of employees, of clients, of customers is reasonable in the eyes of the court. There have been a couple of cases already that have gone through that have decided that. And the court views it as no different from requiring eye protection, from requiring safety boots, from making customers wear pants in the store, any other personal protective equipment. And I'm not putting my personal politics into this, so please don't take this as me going for or against or anything. I'm just relaying what the courts have decided. The courts have decided that requiring current vaccinations is reasonable and is no different from any physical job prerequisite. So for example, you're not going to be allowed to jump behind the wheel of a forklift without being licensed or trained. It's like any other prerequisite. So one thing that I hear a lot from people that want to appeal different employment decisions is I don't have bodily autonomy if I have to get a vaccination. According to the courts, people can still choose not to get vaccinated, just like you can choose not to wear steel-toe boots if you're required to, just like you can choose not to wear safety goggles if you're required to. That choice may have consequences on their employment, however. So they're free to do as they please, and the employers are free to enforce their policies within the letter of the law. Same with requiring extra cleaning or sterilization in the workplace is reasonable, and in the eyes of the courts is viewed no different from sweeping, from removing trip hazards, things like that. It's just a preventative maintenance that is being done to keep people safe. Now, a lot of employers I hear from ask about staff that have come to them with exemptions. Do I have to follow this exemption? Do I have to honor it? What are my rights and obligations? So what the courts have decided on that, if the exemption can be proven and the accommodations requested are reasonable, then the employer should do their best to accommodate. Personal beliefs are generally not quantifiable. It's not something that you can prove, and therefore it's not something that the courts will uphold. The only exemptions or accommodations that the court has upheld so far as it relates to COVID are medical exemptions, and those need to be proven. They need to be accompanied by a doctor's note, or they are not valid in the eyes of the courts. Now, before an employer decides whether to accommodate or not, they need to consider some of the risks involved in that. Would a reasonable person put the personal beliefs of one employee above the overall safety of their staff and clients? Would a reasonable person go bankrupt buying rapid tests because they have staff that don't want to get vaccinated? Again, my personal feelings aside, the courts have decided that employers have to do their best to take care without going into financial hardship. You don't need to ruin yourself to accommodate people under the eyes of the law. And ultimately, the biggest thing that the courts have upheld is the courts view choosing not to follow safety policies, such as masking and vaccination, viewed as a voluntary resignation, as long as the employer communicates it clearly and correctly. So if an employer puts a policy in place that all staff members need to be vaccinated, they need to put that in writing and they need to communicate it to their staff. If they do not do that, and an employee gets fired because of not being vaccinated, then they have a case for wrongful termination. However, if employers put the safety policies in place, communicate them clearly, and communicate the consequences of not following them, then the employee leaving because of that is not being fired. In the eyes of the law, they are voluntarily resigning because they do not wish to follow and critical policy. So what can employers do to limit their liability or their ability to be sued? So as I said, have a written and communicated safety policy. It needs to be very explicit, stating what the requirements are, and sort of a good best practice for employers is to have employees sign off on the policy to prove that you've talked to them about it, that they understand. If there are employees that are not compliant, it's just like any other behavioral action under employment law. They are required to give a written warning to employees that are not compliant. And it needs to be made very clear that if they do not comply, they will no longer be meeting minimum requirements. The courts have actually, and this just happened last week, but the courts have said that unvaccinated employees do not have to be kept in an office or a place of business while the disciplinary procedures are going on. So if someone is not vaccinated, their employer has every right to send them home until such a time as they either become compliant, i.e. get vaccinated, or until the proper disciplinary process under employment law can be followed. The other thing is give the employee time to comply after the warning. So if you have an employee that was very, very hesitant about becoming vaccinated, you clearly communicate the policy and what the consequences are. The employee says, okay, I will get vaccinated. I'm sure we all know you can't get an appointment tomorrow. So the employer has an obligation to give the employee time to comply. Now, again, the courts have upheld that the employee can be excluded from the job site during that time. So they can be sent home with or without pay, but they cannot be fired until they've had a reasonable amount of time to comply. Another best practice is employers should apply the policy equally among all their staff. And this includes managers, this includes supervisors, this includes owners. If the policy is not applied equally, then employers open themselves up to liability for potential wrongful dismissal suits, things like that. And again, just to stress this, even in the case of people with valid medical exemptions, accommodation should not put a business into financial hardship. The accommodation has to be reasonable. So I will touch a little bit more on different employment law at the end, but so much of my day right now is talking with individuals and businesses about vaccinations and about mask policies. So I thought I would start with that, but we're going to get into some of the supports that are available for both individuals and businesses right now. So the number one is employment insurance. The federal government has made some big changes to employment insurance. They did this with the start of the pandemic, but these changes are going until September 24th, 2022. And if, you know, I hope we're not, but if we're still in the pandemic mode at that time, it may be extended. But the only thing that's certain is that it lasts until September 24th, 2022. So a couple of things that they've done to make it easier to qualify for employment insurance. An applicant for employment insurance needs to have 420 hours of insurable employment. Previously, before COVID, in the before times, the long, long ago, it was 700 up to 1,200 hours of insurable employment. So this is a substantial drop. Essentially, with a full-time job, about 10.5 weeks of work will qualify you for EI. The applicant needs to have lost their employment through no fault of their own. This is very important to highlight. If you remember our slide a couple of slides ago, not complying with COVID policies is viewed as voluntary resignation. So that means people that are no longer employed because they did not get vaccinated, people that are no longer employed because they refuse to comply with mask policies, do not qualify for employment insurance if their employer followed all the proper steps. Now, if the employer does not follow the proper steps, i.e. does not communicate the policy, does not give warnings, then the person could apply for EI. That will be up to the courts to determine. Other qualifications, person applying needs to be without work for 7 consecutive days, and they need to be actively looking for work. A lot of people that I deal with, especially for employment insurance, don't actively look for work, and then when they get cut off from employment insurance, want to appeal it. So in terms of actively looking for work, the way you can prove that, saving email confirmations if you're applying to businesses online, or logging businesses that you've contacted, that you've submitted resumes to, that you've talked to, as well as times that you are on job boards, job posting sites, or with employment specialists. The applicant also needs to be ready and capable of work each day. Now, we get a lot of questions about, well, I'm taking, a part-time course in school, do I still qualify for EI? The test of law for that is, if you could work the same hours as you were previously working, yes, it qualifies. So if I'm working an 8 to 5 job, Monday to Friday, and I'm taking a part-time course on evenings and weekends, I can still work 8 to 5 Monday and Friday, so I still qualify. If a person loses their 8 to 5 Monday to Friday job and decides to take school courses during that time, they do not qualify. So it's a very important distinction. The way that people prove that they're ready and capable of work each day is by submitting reporting to EI. I'm sure everyone on this call is familiar with that. I'm not going to go too in-depth in it, but the applicant has to log on every 2 weeks and confirm that they have been ready and capable of work. The biggest change to EI is the weeks of eligibility. So prior to the pandemic, it was 26 weeks was your maximum that you were eligible for under employment insurance. However, any applications made before September 24th are eligible for up to 45 weeks of benefits. The reason for this is that the federal government has determined that in an active pandemic, it's more difficult to find and maintain employment. So the weeks of eligibility help cover that gap so that people can take their, not have to rush and be able to still find a job within that time. So other federal benefits. This is timely because most of the benefits I'm talking about are only confirmed to be valid until May 7th. That being said, the federal government may extend them. However, none of us have any control over that. If it happens, it happens. As of today, I'm only sure about until May 7th. So the Canada Worker Lockdown Benefit is for people that are in regional lockdowns. And this is only for health department approved lockdowns. If an employer decides to close a business based on their own choice, that does not count. But if there's an official lockdown from the provincial government or from the London Middlesex Health Unit, then people would qualify for this. And what they can get is $300 per week if they're unable to work due to the official lockdown. If you apply for this and you are not in an area with an official lockdown, the person that applied for it will almost certainly have to repay that eventually. The Canada Recovery Sickness Benefit, again until May 7th, gives $500 a week up to 6 weeks if you're unable to work because you contract COVID, because you're under a health order to self-isolate, or if you have a doctor's note saying that you cannot be in the public because you are more susceptible to contracting COVID. A lot of times you'll see this with people undergoing chemotherapy or other immunocompromised individuals. So this was put into place to help bridge that gap for employees, especially in precarious employment sectors that don't necessarily have sick time, that couldn't survive if they had to quarantine for multiple weeks. The Canada Recovery Caregiving Benefit is essentially the same as the sickness benefit, but for caregivers. So again, $500 per week, up to 44 weeks per household. And this is workers unable to work at least 50% of the week because they must care for a child, their own child under 12, or another family member, because schools or care facilities are closed. So if the schools close or the care facilities close, those of us with children, small children, have to be at home with them. The government's recognized this and will help compensate those people so that they can still afford their rent and still afford to eat while they're at home taking care of their children. Same with, even if the schools and care facilities are open, if a child or family member under 12 contracts COVID, or if they have to quarantine because they've been in close contact, then this will cover the parents staying home with them for that as well. And we've seen a lot of employers that are very accommodating to things like this recently. However, not all employers either are or have the ability to be accommodating for that. And that's why this benefit was put into place. And I should mention, all of those three benefits that I just talked about are also available to self-employed people. So self-employed people have to keep proof of earnings so that they can show that they are out money because of having to quarantine, having to isolate, or having to take care of a child that is doing one of those. But as long as they can prove that there was a financial impact to them, self-employed individuals qualify for those. So what about the job creators? What about the businesses? What's available to them? Well, business supports are very complicated. I could go into probably a 4-hour presentation on all of the different requirements, but I'm going to try and simplify it as much as possible, just so you're kind of aware of what's out there. And if you want more information, it's available on the Government of Canada website, or you can send me an email, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I can. So the federal government, again, is providing wage and hiring support. So this is a subsidy designed to help cover part of employee wages during lockdowns, as well for businesses that are rehiring as we are reopening the province and the country at large. We'll help subsidize some of the wages for that as well, so that businesses can get people hired now so that they're trained and ready to go once business is back to normal. And I say normal with air quotes. Businesses can also qualify for rent and property expenses support. So again, this is a subsidy to help commercial rent or property expenses so that businesses don't lose their building going through a lockdown or going through a regional pandemic. Now, the qualifications for both of these are variable. It depends on how many employees you have at your business, depends on how much the business makes, and how much revenue you're losing. So for me to get into all that details, we're going to kind of drag down into the mud. So I'm going to move on, but I will say that it is variable. So if you're not sure, if you're talking to an employer who's not sure if they qualify, direct them to the Government of Canada website. There is a Jobs and Growth Fund that was recently announced as well. And this was supporting regional job creation. So this is for new businesses, people that want to start a business during a pandemic. Congratulations, you're very brave to try and start a business during a pandemic. But because you are brave and you're taking that chance, we're going to give you some supports, especially in the areas of transitioning to a green economy. So carbon neutral technologies, paperless technologies, that sort of thing. Fostering an inclusive recovery, which is a very broad statement, but basically what it means is helping the economy recover and helping marginalized individuals and communities experiencing barriers to help recover at the same rate as the rest of us. Digital adoption to improve productivity and production, which is a fancy way of saying automating things. As well as strengthening capacity in sectors critical to Canada's recovery and growth. And that's a very, very broad statement. So again, if you're talking to an employer or if you are an employer and you're not sure whether you qualify for that, I urge you to go to the Government of Canada website, There's a big banner at the top. You can click on COVID-19 and it will take you through if you are eligible or not. As well, there's been an extension of the work sharing program that the government started way back in 2020. The Highly Affected Sectors Credit Availability Program, which is a heck of a mouthful, and the acronym is not much better. But essentially what it is some industries were harder hit than others during the pandemic. Every industry was affected, but restaurants certainly have been harder affected than some. But there are other types of businesses that, again, have been going through those same type things. So for those businesses, the government is offering guaranteed access, low interest loans, anywhere from $25,000 up to $500,000. Again, qualification depends on a whole lot of factors that we don't have the time nor realistically the patience to go through today. But that is all available on the Government of Canada website. Large employer emergency financing facilities. So that's for Canada's largest employers only. I mean, I could be wrong, but I doubt that anybody here is going to qualify for that. That's for the Walmarts, for the McDonald's, for the Amazons, things like that. Again, if there's any questions, Government of Canada website. They are offering as well additional supports for key areas that the government has deemed critical to Canada's growth. Things like aerospace, agriculture and agricultural food production, culture, heritage and sport, energy, specifically green energy. All energy sectors are welcome to apply, but I do know that renewable energy is having the most focus on them. Tourism, transportation, and infrastructure. All areas critical in the government's eyes to our country's recovery. Provincial supports. So the provincial government is not offering a lot of direct financial support. So they are changing the laws and changing legislation. So a couple of examples of laws that Ontario has changed. They've since repealed it, but at the height of the pandemic, there was a moratorium on evictions. So people could not be evicted. Now, some people took this to mean I don't have to pay rent anymore, and those people are in trouble now. However, people were not being evicted for rental arrears during the pandemic. Another step that the Ontario government has taken is that they've capped interest rates for payday loans. The government of Ontario has recognized that the payday loan industry can be predatory depending on how it's run. So they've capped interest charges throughout the pandemic so that if a lower income individual needs a payday loan and they have no other alternative, at least they're getting gouged a little less. There have been numerous other legislative changes from the government of Ontario. I linked a website up on the screen right now that has all of the supports during COVID that are currently active. The one that I've used the most, though, by far with clients is the LEAP, Low Income Energy Program. And what that is it helps subsidize people who can't afford to pay their power bills. So it keeps the lights on, essentially, for Ontario's most vulnerable population. Again, for more details on that program, visit ontario.ca. There's a banner at the top. You can click on COVID-19 and it will take you right to the supports that are offered. So go through some frequently asked questions, things that I'm asked all the time. And by all means, feel free to contribute in the chat. I'm happy to answer any direct questions, either while we're going or after the presentation. Can my employer force me to get vaccinated? I hear that all the time. No, your employer can't force you to get vaccinated. But if they have a safety policy and you choose not to follow it, you're ending your employment anyways. If I lose my job because I choose not to get vaccinated, do I qualify for EI? Probably not. Realistically, probably not. You might. I would have to know all of the details surrounding the case to be able to give a properly qualified legal answer. However, as long as your employer explained their policy and explained what would happen if you didn't follow it, you will not qualify for EI, unfortunately. Can my employer require me to wear a mask? Yes. Your employer can direct you to wear any personal protective equipment for your safety and the safety of those around you. Employers are not obligated to listen to studies, to research the efficiency of masks, anything like that. So if the employer deems that wearing a mask is a preventative action that reduces the risk of their employees or customers getting sick, whether you agree with the science, whether you agree with the policy or not, they are allowed under law to do it. Does my employer have to accommodate my exemption? Again, we touched on this before. There's so much in law that's subjective that it's really hard to give you a yes or no answer because every case is going to be unique. However, if it's for medical reasons and there's a doctor's note and the employer can do it without going into bankruptcy, then they should accommodate you. If they choose not to accommodate you, that's something that you can test in the courts. However, in the past, it has been decided that the safety of other staff and customers is more important than accommodating one associate or one staff member. And again, I'm not saying I agree with this or I don't agree with this. I'm just saying this is what the courts have decided. Can my employer make me pay for rapid testing? So this is a fascinating one. And there was a case that came out of Northern Ontario not too long ago. It's within the last couple months. And essentially what happened was there was a group of miners, like digging in the ground, not underage people. And the mining company did not want to put a policy in place where they had to be vaccinated. So they left the choice up to the employees whether they got vaccinated or not. Now they still have an obligation to keep their employees safe. So what they did is they said, if anybody's not getting vaccinated, that's fine. You still have a job. However, you have to take a rapid test every day before you come to work. And you have to pay for that rapid test out of your own pocket because if you were vaccinated, you wouldn't have to do that. So the employers took this ruling to the labor board and they said, you know, we shouldn't bear the cost of these rapid testing kits. And the court sided with the employees. They said, you're right, your employer put a policy in place. The requirements under that policy are the obligation of your employer. So the employer had to give back all of the money for the rapid tests that these employees had purchased. And I'm willing to bet that shortly thereafter, the employer's policy changed. If I work remotely, do I have to be vaccinated? Great question. If your job is entirely remote work and entirely sedentary, i.e. you don't have to go into the office, you don't have to deal with clients or customers, then the courts have decided that you probably don't need to have a vaccination under a safety policy. However, be aware that if you have to report to a business location in the future, it is well within their rights to insist that you either be vaccinated or other safety protocols before entering that location. So if you're working entirely remotely now, that's totally fine. But if you have to go into the office for a performance review or to pick up supplies or whatever, then you would have to follow the safety policies there. As well, if you have to begin interacting face-to-face with clients or customers, the employer can then reasonably ask you to follow those policies. Currently, the number of decisions that have been able to wind their way through the courts since COVID started is limited. Anybody that has experience either in or with the legal system knows that we move at the speed of snails. And 2 years is a very short amount of time, legally speaking. So there's only a few decisions out there. I tried to highlight the key ones today. However, every unique workplace, every unique market, every employment agreement is going to be different. So nothing that I've said today is legally binding, nor is it legal advice. I'm giving you the best practices and the decisions of the court. If you want legal advice, that's something that lots of people, including myself, are happy to provide, but I need a chance to get all the details of the case. So don't take what I've said today as set in stone. As with anything in law, it's subject to interpretation. However, the decisions that have been made do give us an idea of where the law is moving in general, and it will provide guidance to employers, to legal representatives, and to employees in the future. So the prevailing theory in law right now with regards to employment is that policies and procedures are up to the employer to implement and enforce, and up to the employee to follow. And if those things don't happen, then it's up to the courts to decide that. So that is my presentation. I actually got through it a little bit quicker than I thought I would. So I've got plenty of time for questions if anybody has any. As well, feel free to copy down my email. It's ghume@pathwaysehc.ca. Send me an email. I do tend to be fairly busy as somebody who provides free legal services. My services are in high demand. So if I don't respond to you same day, don't be offended. I will get to you as soon as I possibly can. All right, I'm opening it up. If anyone has any questions, feel free to speak up.
Thanks so much. I'm looking in the chat and we haven't had any questions like while you were presenting. And the frequently asked questions really helps. Wow, me and Carol were like talking privately and saying that those were incredible. But yeah, if anybody has any questions, we just have somebody saying that it was great and very informative. If anybody has any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, or you can talk out loud.
I always have questions. So
Absolutely.
I'll get started, although I would love to hear if anybody's got hypothetical quote unquote scenarios that they want to run past Geoff. My first question, Geoff, is you're so busy, and I know this. Can you tell us sort of very briefly sort of what your role is, and can people make referrals to you? What's sort of the process if somebody's got a client who is experiencing some sort of legal conundrum?
Absolutely. I'm an advocate and a paralegal, and what I do specifically, I operate in 3 areas of law, and I help clients, and there are no requisites for my service. I will help somebody with $1 in their bank account or $1 million in their bank account. It does not matter. I provide my services free of charge to anyone and everyone. I appeal denials of benefits. So any of the government benefits I listed today, as well as other benefits like Canada Pension Plan, Ontario Disability Support Program, Ontario Works, any of those benefits, if a client is denied those and you feel that they are entitled to them, I invite you to refer them to our department and we can definitely help them. I also do employment law, so EI is a specialty of mine, but as well contract interpretation, as well as giving advice about obligations and requirements under Ontario's employment law. And then finally, in the areas of housing stability. So if somebody is facing a bad faith eviction due to renovation, due to the landlord claiming that their family is moving in, or due to any other unfounded reason, then I will help fight that eviction and try and get them some time to get onto more stable housing. Now, what the paralegals do at Pathways is only half the story. We also have 2 social workers that help with the application for all of what I just said. So anyone applying for government benefits, anyone applying for housing, looking for new housing, we have some excellent social workers that help with that as well. Sorry, I know you asked for a quick overview, but it's more difficult to do that. But that's what we do. I invite you to direct any questions involving disability law, involving benefits, employment law, to our department, and we can help with that. And certainly if you have any clients that are facing any of the things that I talked about, we are able to give them a free consultation. I can't promise that we'll take their case because we need all the information, of course, but we will see them for free, we will talk to them for free, and we will give them advice for free so that they know where to go next. And if it's something that we're able to represent them on, we absolutely will.
That's great, thank you. While you were answering that question, we did get one in the chat. We got 2 actually. Somebody asked, the same as rapid tests, would an employer have to provide masks for personal protective equipment?
Yes, generally, most employers do have to provide personal protective equipment. Now, that's not the same across the board. If you're considered an independent contractor, and this is very prevalent in the construction industry, your employer can ask you to provide your own PPE, things like safety boots, things like hard hats. Quite often, employees have to buy. However, given the rapid test legal ruling, if it went to court, the courts would almost certainly decide that the employer has an obligation to provide those masks, yes.
Okay. Another person asked just if you would be willing to share this presentation, the slide deck.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I don't know what the easiest way to do that is. Maybe Carol, if I email it to you, can you disseminate it from there?
Absolutely, yes. We'll just set it out to everybody who's attending today.
Perfect.
Yes, and also shortly after this, either probably tomorrow, this recording will be up on YouTube. So if you want to watch it again, you have the ability to watch it again. Somebody else asks, I want to confirm, are you able to help with ODSP if a client's application is rejected?
Yes, absolutely. That is our specialty, in fact. So yes, if you've got a client who has been rejected from ODSP, we are happy to have a conversation with them.
We got one more. If an employer is not holding up the COVID policy, i.e. not enforcing staff to wear masks, and the employment ends, is that considered no fault of their own?
Depends on why the employment ends. So I would need a little bit more. Information to be able to answer that properly. However, if an employer is not requiring, let's say, a supervisor to wear masks, but they are requiring hourly staff to wear masks, and they fire you for not wearing a mask, you would likely be able to fight that as a wrongful dismissal because they were not upholding that policy with the supervisor. So that's why I said it has to be applied equally. Again, there's a lot of factors. It's not something that I can give a definite answer on. However, most likely, if the policy is not being the same across all employees, it may be grounds for wrongful dismissal.
So she gave another example and she said, what if the employment ends due to the person's not comfortable in the workplace because the staff aren't following the COVID policy, like because it's not being enforced by the employer?
That is a fascinating situation, and I'm sorry for whoever's in that situation. Legally speaking, my recommendations is to bring that to your direct supervisor in writing so that you have proof to show that you're not comfortable because of this. If the employer does not react and does not do anything following that written communication, and then you decide to leave, you would have a very strong case for wrongful dismissal because of that, and most likely would qualify for employment insurance if that was the case. Okay.
Is there a general email that you're willing, that's okay if these people share with their clients?
So that's a great question. I don't have a general email. However, at pathways.ca, pathwaysehc.ca, our website, there is a form that will, it's like an e-form that the client can fill out, give us their email and like a 2-sentence description of their problem. And our legal assistant, Rwand, who is also fluent in Arabic as well as English, will reach out to that person and make sure they get connected to the right advocate. So you can refer the clients directly to me and I can send them out from there, or you can refer them to our website, which we do monitor and we respond to inquiries on our website within 24 hours.
Great, and Carol put that website in the chat. Is there any other questions right now? We just had lots of people saying that it was a great presentation. Is there any other questions for the moment?
Thank you very much for this opportunity to speak. This has been great. And I hope you all consider me part of your network now. I'm here to help in any way I can. I'm a firm believer that we are all stronger together, so feel free to reach out and I will do the same for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And also, before everybody goes, as normal Wednesday at 1 protocol, we have a little poll for you just to see if you enjoyed this presentation and if you would use it in the future. While they're filling out the poll, we got another question. Somebody asked, are employers allowed to ask in job ads that you must be vaccinated?
Most likely, yes. Employers can say in job ads that you need a forklift license to apply. Employers can say in job ads that you need certain education to apply. Therefore, the courts would almost definitely uphold that they can request vaccination status. It's the same as being licensed. It's this in the eyes of the law, anyways.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. And a couple more answers are trickling in on the poll, but we have 100% for both, that everybody's happy and everybody will use this information in the future. So I'm going to end the poll now. And thank you so much, everybody. Like I said, this will be available on YouTube, which the link will be shared back out with you with the slide deck. And you have the email. So thank you so much for coming.
Yeah.
Have a great
Thank you very much.